in 1992 when Dr. Wilson came to Colorado State University as a young assistant professor. And after being at CSU for a couple of years, he still did not have any laboratory space on campus. And they kept giving him different excuses on why they couldn't find space for him to do his engines research. And meanwhile, he had been driving up and down North College Avenue and had seen this lovely building sitting here with not much activity in it. And so he reached out to the city and was able to come in and take a tour, and decided that a few pigeons, no bathroom, no heat really were not issues at all. They could be challenges that could be met. And so he came to an agreement with the city of Fort Collins, and I believe paid like $1 a year or something in a lease. And they entered into an agreement that he would use the space for his research activities and would make improvements as needed and would deal with the pigeons. And so he started, and he and his grad students, and we have photos of them sitting in their down jackets with a porta potty out back. So they were one of the very first projects that they took on were, and we will see this when we go into the old building because it's still here, but the natural gas pipelines that run across the United States, every so often they have to have a compressor station that increases the pressure to move the gas to the next station. And so Dr. Wilson had this idea that if he could reduce the emissions by a small amount on each one of those compressor stations by some very practical, easy to implement fix or adjustment to the engine, that the overall impact across the United States would be significant because there are so many of those engines in use. But there was no way to actually get the engine inside the building. So they opened up the roof and got a crane and blocked off College Avenue and basically hoisted the engine into the floor of the engines lab, and it still sits there today. And we still do tests on it, and we're still making tweaks because the gas companies are in no hurry to replace those engines. They work, they're very reliable, and so they're all still in use across the US. So that was kind of the beginning. There are additional engines that have been added in additional engine skids, and even today what happens is someone like Caterpillar or Cummins will reach out to us and they will ship us an engine and they will ship us the parts and pieces they want tested, and then our students and staff mount those engines onto the test skid, connect it to the infrastructure in the building, and run the tests for the different companies. And so that research is very much still relevant and very active, and we have many students still involved in that research that really Dr. Wilson started in the early 1990s. Additional research capacity has been added. A local company, Spray, is very interested in what does it look like if you put alternative forms of energy back onto a power grid? So what does solar energy going back onto a power grid, wind energy? And so they have a grid simulator in the basement of the Powerhouse, and then they have research staff that are here at the Powerhouse that still utilize that equipment, and they have been here for many years. So that's one of the interesting things about Powerhouse that you will see throughout the building is that although this building is focused on research and very much connected to Colorado State University, we are also very connected to industry, and we have very close working relationships with industry. We try to be a neutral third party that provides good data, and we have been known to enter into somewhat contentious research situations to provide the data that people on both sides of the argument can use in part of their discussion. And so have very close working relationships with the natural gas industry, but also with organizations like the Environmental Defense Fund. And so the gas industry and EDF recently funded a study that we led here at CSU looking at the amount of methane emissions off of transmission lines. And part of that research came to be because of the initial work that we did with the Bessemer engine that you'll see in the old power plant. So it became very full, and there were discussions about building an entire new facility, but they decided in 2010 that what they could do perhaps is expand their current facility. So they went forward to the city, and this is where Bond became very involved, is what would it look like to attach something very lightly to the side of that building that would provide the capacity to house students and additional office spaces and additional research space, and how to do that in a very deliberate way, so to maintain the integrity of the old building but create what we needed to move forward and keep growing. And so what they constructed is this building, which is a laboratory in of itself. And so it does not have an HVAC system. It has 26 miles of plastic tubing that runs through the walls and through the ceiling above you on each of the floors. And then it has a simulator. Actually, it's not technically a simulator in that it actually is, it's more of a predictive model, and it predicts if the weather is going to be hotter tomorrow than it is today, it will pump cooler water, as opposed to if it's going to be much cooler, it will pump warmer water. And so it tries to warm and cool the walls in anticipation of what the weather is going to be. As you might imagine, some days it knocks it out of the park, and some days it's a little sweaty in here. But more or less, by and large, it works very well. But because of that, we don't have any utility bills related to a traditional air conditioning system, because we don't. We're just pumping water, heating it and cooling it and pumping some water through. That whole concept was very revolutionary, and the city, thankfully, again, was behind the project, and we were able to get it through the permitting process and get permission to actually conduct this experiment. And so we moved in the spring of 2014, and with all the different types of weather we've had since then, we have remained very cool and comfortable. The other thing that is unique about this building is that we have LED lighting, which is not such a big deal in 2019, but in 2012 and 2013, when the building was being designed, LED lighting was not readily available. And so Dr. Wilson actually ended up going to China and working directly with a factory in China to get the LED lighting manufactured and installed. So those are two small little factoids about the building and the actual operation of it. The other part that they tried to be very considerate of is that given the city had landscaped and we had all these beautiful trees, a few of which had to be cut down. And so those trees were reclaimed, and the lumber that you see in the lobby area is from those trees. So there are some kind of nice touches like that throughout the building. And Ron, feel free to contribute any others that I may have missed. So I think what we will do is we will walk through the first floor, down through the lobby, and then on into the old building. Go ahead.
I just want to ask if you could touch on the replacement of the smokestacks. You may be doing that later on,
Yes.
But if I remember correctly, you also rebuilt the coal hopper.
Yeah, so if it's okay with all of you, I would like to go up on the roof as kind of our final stop and look back down onto the property this way, but then also allow you to look back off into the river, because it gives you a very unique perspective on what they have done with the kayak park, because there is an incredible amount of dirt and rock that they have moved to create that area. And so I would like to do that kind of at the end of our tour. If that's okay, we'll finish up on the fourth floor. As we walk through the lobby, there is a small, funny-looking little machine. And one of the areas where Dr. Wilson and some of his grad students did some work was trying to figure out if there was a way they could reduce the emissions in two-stroke engines. And so they did quite a bit of work in India. And so that little vehicle is a tuk-tuk from India. And it's what they use to try to see if they could tweak the two-stroke engine enough to reduce the emissions. At the end of the day, that research, although it was interesting, was not something that they were able to implement on a large scale. Those engines are just a lot more finicky, and doing that work into the developing country was very challenging compared to making the tweaks on the compressor stations for the natural gas pipeline, which is here in the United States. The other thing that we will see as we do our loop through is we now are starting to do an increased amount of work in Rwanda and Uganda on helping villages bring up small microgrids. And so the hope of installing and having access to a national power grid in those countries is just fading. People have really kind of given up on the concept. The governments continue to be very unstable, and we probably will never get to the point where they can support a national power grid. And so our researchers are trying to figure out a way that they can bring up and create reliable village-sized mini or microgrid. And so basically a village will, not unlike what Fort Collins did in the very beginning with electricity, the village will have a generator or some other source of power, and they will create a small power grid that will serve that village. And the goal is to try to get lighting and cooking capability into most of the homes in most of the villages. But as you can imagine, one of the challenges that happens with that is if you have a microgrid that has a limited amount of power and you're planning on each home doing a little bit of lighting and a little bit of cooking, and then someone gets a really fancy appliance and pulls all the power. So as we walk through, you'll see that we have some very nice stainless steel appliances sitting along the wall. We're trying to learn about the load that those appliances generate and what impact that has on one of these small micro or mini grids. So lots of cool things happening at Powerhouse. So if you guys are rested a bit, I think what we'll do is we'll start on the first floor. Access between the floors is via stairs, but we have an elevator. So we'll come back, and those of you who would like to take the elevator to the next can do the elevator. The rest of us will go up the stairs and we'll reconvene on each floor outside the elevator. Any questions before we get going?